So can you kind of explain why building cities around cars isn't perfect? Like, why is it not fine just to keep going with cars the way that we are?
Cars take up a lot of space in our cities, so when it comes to just the roadways that we build to accommodate them, to the parking, they're not good for the environment, not just from the perspective of having the emissions that they create, but tire rubber gets into the ocean. Actually, there was a report that was done a few weeks ago where in the Antarctic there was plastic particulates snowing down.
Yeah.
And people suggest that that's actually like car tire particulates.
Wow.
They're dangerous, people, speed, injuries from car accidents is like one of the top causes. Even death, like child mortality, one of the biggest causes is car crashes.
Wow.
So there's just a number of things, and then so those are like the kind of imminent risks, but there's just like the psychological experience of a city. And there's a Danish architect named Jan Gehl, and he talked about this idea called the human scale city. And if you spend any time in Europe, you'll see that cities there, or many cities there, are a lot more comfortable, and it's because they were built before the car was really around. And so I think a lot of people are drawn to go to Europe because of that feeling they get, because North American cities were primarily built to accommodate the vehicle.
What's the difference there? Like, I think that's something that people go, oh, well, like Europe, you can't compare Europe to North America, but
yeah.
How does a bike affect that? How does a bike affect that urban environment?
Well, they just need less space, so you can use more space for other things like parks or bigger sidewalks. What I feel like is happening in most North American cities right now are that pedestrians and cyclists are basically being pit against each other with a very small amount of space. There's a big, most cities are getting these bird or lime scooters, which are great, but they're causing all sorts of controversy because they take up space on the sidewalk. And no one seems to want to talk about the reason that people are riding their scooters on the sidewalk, or why they're riding their bikes on the sidewalk, is because the roadways are dangerous.
Right.
So if the issue is that we need more space for bikes and e-scooters, we should create separate lanes for them aside from the sidewalk, and that's going to need to take away space from cars, which gets back to the whole point as to why it's not great to build cities to prioritize the needs of drivers. Yeah.
And that whole idea of like single mode transport, like we're hanging all of our hats on one hook. It's like we drive cars, and cars, that's the only way to get around. Just because of these kids, I'm gonna put an audio recorder just like right in front of your face.
Sure. It's kids using the park.
I know. Come on.
Go play some video games.
Yeah. When should be inside already? Yeah. Why does it actually work, having bikes and cars in the same city? Like, because we can't just build one biking city and one car city.
Oh, yeah.
The two have to live together.
Sure.
How do they play together? How does that work?
I think that the only way to create peaceful coexistence between people who choose to ride bikes and people who drive, and even pedestrians, is to allocate space to each of them.
Right.
There are, in European cities, in the Netherlands, they have these things called woonerfs. I think you spent some time, so you're familiar, but it's where they use traffic calming design so that cars can go on these roads, but like they can only go like 10 to 20 kilometers an hour because of the way the road's designed.
Yeah.
And pedestrians are walking and people are riding bikes. That's pretty idyllic, and I don't know that we're there yet in North America, and we almost might be past the point to change all of our roadways to woonerfs. So to ensure that everyone gets around both efficiently and safely, we just need infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't mean paint. Right. So that's a big thing. Like, paint doesn't do anything, right? Sharrows, or those those bikes that are painted on the road with the arrows that suggest that you can just share the road, that doesn't do anything, right? It's a communicative tool. It does nothing to keep people safe. So when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about separated bike lanes. So using a physical barrier like bollards or concrete barriers, or what I prefer actually in, I think it's the Robson Street or maybe Granville Street bike lane in Vancouver, where they use flower planters.
Beautiful,
it's
right?
Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It adds, and I've said this before, but I think like cycling infrastructure can beautify a city, and if you do it in a certain way, it can almost be public art. Right. How many roads do you say that about? Like, oh, that road's a beautiful thing. Like, maybe if you're speeding down in like a Lamborghini or something and it's perfectly smooth, but the visual experience of it is just nothing.
Yeah.
And so cycling infrastructure doesn't only just add utility to a city, it can actually do something to make it seem just more pleasant.
Yeah.
And a point that someone on Twitter made a while ago, I can't remember, they said that cycling infrastructure actually protects pedestrians too. Because you're hearing all these stories about people driving into like restaurants, the libraries. Like, it's like almost every day I see some story about someone who's speeding and just lost control of their car and like mowed over a pedestrian. Right. It's insane, right? So cycling infrastructure doesn't only protect cyclists, it protects pedestrians.
Right.
From the vehicle, which we need to start thinking about the dangers of. It's starting to wreak havoc in our cities. And
did you see the Hassan Minhaj special that he just put up?
No.
Oh, you're gonna love it. It's all about
cars?
Public transit. And how about like the DMV and like all
Nice.
the Koch brothers are taking down public transit initiatives across the U.S. It's like, it's real good. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, I like all of his stuff, but
but this is like
urban-oriented.
Yeah. He just like found you, and he was like, "I'm gonna just get this guy's rocks off." This guy knows what he's gonna like. Okay, now I think that there is still this like fear that bikes are against cars, and this sort of bikes versus cars debate is really quite divisive.
Yeah.
What are some misconceptions around that bikes versus car idea?
What I find challenging about pitting cyclists against drivers is that it completely denies the reality that most of us use all three modalities or wheelchairs. Like, if someone walks or uses a wheelchair or rides a bike or drives or takes transit, there's a chance they're going to do all of those things.
Right.
So what I see happen, and I've actually had issues with some people in the media and some arguments around this, is I think that a lot of the media stokes this fire just because it gets people irritated, and it's something to talk about. And I often think it just happens because they're just lacking things to talk about. I always say when someone writes an op-ed or makes some sort of story about why cyclists are bad, it's a slow news day for them.
Right.
So I think a lot of that, but that's fed by negative experiences that cyclists have with drivers or drivers have with cyclists or pedestrians. But the reason that they have those negative experiences is because there's no infrastructure, right? So there's an interesting study done in New York by the New York Department of Transportation, and they looked at the incidence of like scofflaw cyclists that broke the law, and they looked at pre and post a cycle track being put in, and they found that the percentage of people who rode on their bikes on this particular street before the bike lane went in was 50%. After, it was 3%.
Wow.
So, and they've done studies in Denmark, like all of these bad behaviors that they are breaking the law and they are putting other people in danger. They're caused because people are just terrified of being on the road. Right. And so I think if we understand, if you look at the behavior that we find irritating when it comes to cyclists, and we believe that they're good people, they don't want to harm others, and they just want to be safe, then we might have a better way of understanding why people do the things they do. Right?
Yeah.
We create stories in our head about why people do things. They're just trying to get around. Seriously.
Yeah, they're not like getting from A to B.
They're not gonna be like, I really want to make that person mad, or I really want that pedestrian to be scared.
Right.
There might be some sociopaths out there that think like that, but the majority of people are just like trying to get to work or like meet their kid, or or go have fun on a bike.
And for I think that you're right. It is just sort of like when you're in the car, you have no empathy for other people, and it goes for other vehicle drivers as well. I mean, everybody's like, "Oh my God, like people from Alberta don't know how to drive." You know, and it's like, no, that's not the issue. That's just you're in a car and they're in a car, so you just associate them as no one or worth nothing.
Driving a car, I'm the worst version of myself behind the wheel of a car. Seriously, like I've been driving, you know, I don't own a car, but I've been staying with my parents, and I use their car, and I just find myself not liking myself.
No, yeah.
These thoughts come in my head, I get irritated. And what's interesting is, you know, I've been riding my bike a lot too here, and I make eye contact with people on my bike.
Right.
I smile at people. I give them a nod. You know, I don't do that in my car. I'm listening to music or the radio. I'm in my own world.
You're bubbled up.
You're literally in like a sheet of metal that completely separates you from everybody else. And they've actually done a study on this where they found that your capacity to empathize with someone is actually affected by the way you choose to get around your city. Right,
like if you drive more, you probably have higher levels of frustration.
Yeah, or it's just harder for you because people. I think what I see when you're behind the wheel of a car, people are objects that you're trying to navigate around.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
They're not people.
Yeah.
They're impediments to your commute.
Yeah.
When you're riding a bike or you're walking, you have to navigate around people, but you're more able to recognize that they're literally people.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just, I mean, there are conscious drivers out there, and not everyone's like a jerk if they're driving a car, but I just think it really makes it challenging for us to connect with people, which is extremely important nowadays, where there's like everything to argue about in Twitter and you know, Reddit, Facebook arguments.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to divide us, and I just don't think getting around
should be the place to air that out.
To air that. It's just like
Seriously.
we're just trying to move around our cities. So,
is there any cities that are doing this well in North America right now?
Yeah, I think Montreal is doing a really good job. It's amazing. I think Montreal is particularly a good example because one of the big arguments against cycling infrastructure in North American cities is snow.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever spent any days in the wintertime in Montreal, but it can be hellish, you know. It's like minus 40.
Yeah.
It can get up to minus 40 like Celsius, which for your American, you know, viewers also translates to Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
The one thing that like switches over between Celsius and Fahrenheit. But they have a system where they use brine to keep it's actually environmentally friendly. They use a brine solution instead of some chemical solution to keep the bike lanes clear. They plow them regularly, and what's actually interesting is I'm a winter cyclist.
I'm gonna kick the ball and then we have to chase after it.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's so good. But yeah, winter cycling is great.
Yeah.
You know, I get around easier than I hate driving in the winter, just in general. I mean, in Victoria, you know.
Yeah, we got it pretty good, baby.
Yeah, you're spoiled.
In one of my classes, Ray Stratsma.
Oh, I know Ray.
Yeah, he talks about the concept of latent demand.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we're waiting on people to, you know, join the cycling bandwagon, but you have to build that infrastructure to make them feel comfortable for them to do it.
Yeah.
And then once they do it, then there's more cyclists, which actually makes it safer, so more people start riding, which starts the cycle.
Another term would be like network effects. So the more people that use something, the more value it has. And I think from a political perspective, because I think the whole issue around cycling infrastructure is completely about political will.
Yeah.
It's not about money, because we know how cheap it is. It's about politicians being scared of angering their driver constituents, which is right now the majority.
Totally.
And this goes with probably most environmental movements, but like we need to move fast, and working in small pieces is not going to convince people. You got to like make a really drastic transformation to the way we do things, and overnight. And the only way we're going to do that is really quickly implementing a cycling infrastructure.
Yeah.
You know, so. And politicians, I know I'm friends with a lot of politicians, and they get it. They understand.
Yeah, they know what's going on.
They just want to get reelected.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they want their job.
They want their job, and so it's a weird system when it comes to our democracy with like how do you instill change, and and do things that you know are right, but you don't because your job depends on appeasing people who don't want to believe in that.
Well, I mean, I think bikes are probably going to be one of the easiest outs that we can get at this
quick
point.
win.
It's a quick win,
Yeah.
and you know, I think there is slow movement happening in a lot of places. So, yeah, I think we're good. I think we got lots of stuff.
Sweet, man.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna stage us getting on the bikes and leaving.
Okay.
Okay.
You do that.
Yeah.